Yep, we're back.
Okay. It's
That
just not
is great.
recording anymore. So apparently it can't record anymore. So I don't know what that is, but yes. So I'm going to have
Is
to
it the
do...
same on the same link? Or
Still
is
on.
it... That's great.
No, new link. It'll be a new
No,
link
new
now.
link.
It's a second video.
New link.
I'll share that on Twitter now.
That's really frustrating because obviously we've lost all the chat messages as well. Yes, we're back, guys.
Not in Discord though.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, but I can't display them on screen in the way that I was. Yes, yeah, I'm really sorry, everyone, for that. I don't know what happened. Everything froze up my end, and the stream died. And then in trying to come back, it was saying that there was problems with the recording settings. Restarted my computer. Still can't record the video locally. I'm wondering if there's a space issue somewhere. There shouldn't be because I've got lots of hard drive space, but one of those things. Anyway, I will have to join this together and publish a clean version where we lose all the crap in the middle. I do apologise though for the errors. However, I think we're good to continue. So we've just explained the difference between why we might use don't and lack, and also why some people, and in fact most people you'll talk to online, don't have that distinction between don't and lack. And also we addressed this statement that's on the screen where, it seems like it's talking about a belief, not a mere lack of belief. So thank you for everybody that has come back so far, and those that will join us in a moment as well, I hope. It's kind of gutting when you're having such a fun stream for something like that to happen. There are some of the more drier streams where we wish it would happen just to give us something to do. But is what it is at the end of the day. I've been saying for a long time I need to upgrade my computer, and if that wasn't evidence of it, then I don't know what is. Maybe it's time for a new credit card. So, you guys ready to continue, or was there anything else that you felt that needed to?
No, I think we can continue.
Excellent.
That God doesn't exist, but I so strongly suspect that he doesn't that I don't want to waste my time. Given this, I think it's very easy to see why most atheists favour the epistemic psychological definition of atheism. Now, one might have issues with this definition, as many, including myself, do, but this isn't the place nor time to delve into them.
Why not?
Rather, the point here is to simply explain why most atheists favour lack theism.
I don't know if anybody's caught it, but there's been a couple of times where he's mentioned that he's actually critical of the lack theist or lack of belief definition now.
Yeah.
It's sort of inserted in there quite quickly and just kind of glazed over. But he does admit now that he has some criticisms of that particular stance,
and he presents some criticisms towards the end as well. But he at the beginning he says something like, "I'll defend both definitions" or something like that. And to me, I mean, I guess this makes sense as a defense to some extent, but I just don't find this defense particularly good.
It's not particularly good, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I think we might at the end of the stream try to sort of talk about what might be a good defense for the lack of belief definition. I mean, we've mentioned a few things already. Maybe it's the time and place to do it now. I don't know, but I think just to be balanced about it, I think it would be a good practice to try to figure out. I myself tried to figure that out many times, but I must say that I have a few issues with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good thing to actually, and I think if anybody who is watching has some reasons, put them in the chat, leave them in the comments, send us a tweet, send us a DM or anything like that. We're interested to hear why you prefer the lack of belief definition. Hopefully you can say more than, well, that's just what people use. We would like it to be a little bit more well thought out. I think, Philip, you're right. We should save it for the end. And there's a few things that I can say about it too, about how I can see people's uses working.
Okay, perfect.
Given this framework, we can then expand into such categories as weak atheism and strong atheism, with a weak atheist being someone who just isn't convinced of theism, and a strong atheist being one who affirms the negation of theism. Again, whether you prefer this definition or not doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's a robust framework that most self-described atheists favour. In philosophy, at least, atheism should be construed as the proposition that God does not exist, or, more broadly, the proposition that there are no gods. This quote is from Paul Draper's Stanford Encyclopedia article titled
I've read that enough times to know.
Atheism is the view that there is no God.
IEP.
Agnosticism is traditionally characterized as neither believing that God exists nor believing that God does not exist. This quote is from Matt McCormick's Internet Encyclopedia article titled Atheism.
Yep.
Are agnostics atheists? No. An atheist, like a Christian, holds that we can know whether or not there is a God. The Christian holds that we know that there is a God, the atheist that we can know that there is not. The agnostic suspends judgment, saying that there are not sufficient grounds either for affirmation or denial. And this quote is from Bertrand Russell's essay titled, What is an Agnostic? Now, all three of these wonderful people are highly respected philosophers who also happen to be self-described atheists. Add to this list Oppie, Alex Malpass, and Ozymandias, who all also happen to be atheist philosophers, and we are confronted by another interesting observation. Why is it that most atheist philosophers opt for the metaphysical proposition that there are no gods, as opposed to the epistemic psychological definition? Well, Draper does a very good job of breaking down some of these reasons in his Stanford Encyclopedia article, as does Oppie when presenting his fourfold distinction of theists, atheists, agnostics, and agnostics,
the fact
which
that
I'm more
this
than
is
happy
here,
to dedicate an entire video to, should enough of you be interested.
it's brilliant. The fact that this is here is such a big deal to me, especially if he actually dedicates an entire video to it. Right? Like this is excellent, because I think Oppie's general sort of construction of all terms is just very, very good, and I would highly endorse this type of
it's sleek, simple, and covers all sides of the proposition, and even the non-side of the proposition.
Exactly.
I'd still say it's still missing a couple of points, though, as well. Like the agnostic and the apatheist, because they are different positions. They're just not direct answers to the proposition. They're sort of almost passive answers to it.
Yeah, they're sort of one step removed from this actual kind of discussion, which is probably why he doesn't really get into it in the fourfold distinction.
Yeah, I will also say... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, because he's covering the people that are actually involved in the discussion and the people who can't be involved in the discussion.
Yeah. No, to me, just like, of course, you can add as much detail as you want to any of these, right? Like you could expand any of these into like much like more minute details if you wanted to, right? You could say, for example, you could make a distinction between, certainty or certain degrees of certainty if you wanted to. You could make many more and further sort of more detailed things for any of these labels if you wanted to. The question is, what is most appropriate as labels for the conversations that usually happen around this sort of theme, around this proposition, the proposition of God. What are the most appropriate labels to use? That's the question to ask. Not whether or not one is more detailed or not, because you could always just construe a new term that is even more detailed, and have a set that is even more detailed of possible answers, and say, oh well, but this is more detailed, right? So this should be, because it's better because it's more detailed. That is not necessarily the case, right? The question is, what is the most appropriate for the level at which the conversation is happening around the proposition of God existing? That should be the focus, not necessarily more detail, less detail, whatever, right? Because it depends on the conversations that are happening.
It definitely does. Yeah. But through conversations that I've had, quite a lot of so using the extra two labels that I mentioned before, quite a lot of self-described atheists would actually fit the agnostic position when I've had the discussion with them. Now, I actually use a little bit of agnosticism as a justification for my atheism, but their entire position, their entire justification for not believing in a god was it's so incoherent and ill-defined that it's not worth considering. And that was their entire position. And it was just like, well, that doesn't really fit into one of these four. And I understand what you're saying about the distinction here, because the top three are those that have actually thought about it and given an answer, to the proposition. They appreciate the proposition is something that could be true or false, and it's just those that are saying it is, it isn't, or they're not sure. And the person down the bottom, or the people down the bottom, the innocents, they've never considered the question at all. Whereas, the agnostic and the apatheist, they've been presented the question, but they've got different reasons for not even bothering to consider it. So it's a different kind of lack of belief to the innocents.
Yeah, I mean, as Wittgenstein would say, what's the most appropriate language for the language game that we're playing? And these are basically the most appropriate language to use for that particular game that's under discussion.
Yeah, and if it is, like, if you can actually say that it is inconsistent, then that seems to me like a good reason to think that it is false. That seems to be like an indirect proof. If you can get to the contradiction, then you can sort of say that whatever you're assuming for the indirect proof is false. So that could be a way to look at it. I guess the agnostics, I haven't looked much into it. I have to be honest. I think they don't even think that this sort of is a proposition or something like that.
That's basically, it's so incoherent and ill-defined, it becomes meaningless. And because it's meaningless, it can't be evaluated as true or false. So if it can't be evaluated as true or false, then it's not a proposition.
That sort of, makes sense.
We good to continue?
Yeah, we're good. We're good to continue.
Who knows? I might even be able to get Oppie in on the script, which, let's face it, would be bloody awesome. And that's awesome in the sense of reverential fear. Anyhow, my purpose here isn't to present a forceful case for or against either of the popular definitions of atheism. Rather, my purpose is to sufficiently explain why each definition tends to be favoured by certain communities. Hopefully, I've already achieved this with the epistemic definition in the prior chapter, and I'll now equally attempt to do the same for the metaphysical definition. Consider this quote from Oppie, taken from a companion of atheism and philosophy. If we accept that there is this distinction between strong atheism and weak atheism, we should surely accept that there is a similar distinction between strong theism and weak theism. Strong theists reject the claim that there are no gods, while weak theists merely refrain from accepting the claim that there are no gods. And then we shall have it that agnostics are both weak atheists and weak theists. This is but one of many objections levelled at the epistemic psychological definition of atheism. Another is the reductio that it entails that rocks must be atheists, since they too lack a belief in the gods. And yet another objection refers to the strong arguments we have in favour of there being no god, or at least no omni-attributed god. If atheism is defined as an epistemic state, then it's not correct to say that these arguments are in favour of atheism, is it? Now, there are ways to respond to these objections. For instance, for the rock objection, we could say that in order for one to lack a belief in a proposition, one must have the possibility to believe in the proposition, which rocks don't, since they lack the necessary cognitive apparatus.
Which is one of the things that I raised with Aaron Ra, because I said it's pointless describing things in terms of mental states when they can't have mental states. But like we alluded to earlier, if you're talking about lack of belief in its purest term, it means absence of a psychological state. A rock is absent of all psychological states because it's absent of a mind completely. So, and that's how that absurdum sort of, comes in there. And that is why I think the distinction between don't believe and lack of belief is useful.
But again, my purpose here isn't to defend either position. I don't necessarily endorse any of the objections or responses I've just given. All I'm aiming to achieve here is to illustrate why, in a nutshell, different communities favour different definitions. Now, it would be somewhat remiss of me, as I think it's somewhat remiss of others, not to acknowledge that the claim that none of the philosophical literature defines atheism in the lack-theism sense is, I love to break it to you, simply false. Yes, most
Hang
of
on.
the literature, at least as much as I've read, endorses the metaphysical.
I mean, this is kind of true. It's not popular, but there are certain people that use it. I think Stephen Bullivant uses it in that way. And if you look at William Rowe's kind of article in the Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy, it's used there. Simon Blackburn uses it in the 2016 Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy. It is used.
Was this the lack of belief for all of them? I think
it mentions lack of belief.
Yeah. I think the Stephen Bullivant one mentioned absence of belief, so absence, lack, same difference. Was that in the Oxford Handbook of Atheism or something? Or
I mean, in that
or
book,
it could be the Cambridge Companion.
Oh, okay.
In that book, it is quite, like, in a way endorsed, like this lack of belief definition. In a way, they sort of argue that both definitions have been used, but that there is enough to show that both definitions are perfectly valid for use in philosophy, and so they side in that book for the lack of belief definition. But I think, like, as Rationality Rules points out here, I think, and that's something that I'm happy to hear. It's true that it's like lack of belief is also used in philosophy, but like there's an overwhelming sort of majority that uses the beliefs that God does not exist.
Yeah, I can give you like 50 papers showing it used in that way for
every
I mean, I paper that doesn't use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hey, there might be the odd scientific paper out there that uses theory in a different way to other papers.
Yeah, I don't think it's as strong as theory is consolidated in science.
I was just being a bit silly with that one.
Yeah, but it is like most philosophical texts use the sort of.
Yeah. I mean, if you go back to Flu's paper, he even says in it, I know atheism
but this is uncommon.
Used.
Yes. Yeah.
But I want to define it this way instead because of these reasons. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's just it. So it's not a settled thing. It really isn't a settled thing, especially not in the way that a scientific theory is more of a settled thing. It really is much more specific when we're talking a bit about science and what a scientific theory is. But equally, there is that a bit more rigor there. Once you understand the positions, there is a bit more rigor to the proposition or belief gods do not exist position than purely the lack of belief definition. And I think if more people took the time to understand some of the logic, they might go, at the very least, okay, yeah, I do understand why this is generally preferred in at least philosophy. Colloquially, it's generally used this way, so I'm going to maintain my lack of belief usage. But I understand why, in academia it's used this way and why it ought to be used that way.
Physical definition of atheism. But as Draper informs us, there are indeed philosophers and philosophical dictionaries that favour defining atheism as a psychological state, such as the Oxford Handbook on Atheism. Further still, the philosopher Stephen Bullivant defends the psychological definition on grounds of its utility, arguing that it best serves as an umbrella term for many subcategories of atheism, such as strong and weak atheism. So, while it's true that most of the philosophical literature favours the metaphysical definition, there is a respectful segment that doesn't. Finally, I just want to gently touch upon agnosticism. Many critics of the lack-theism position hit hard on the fact that a psychological state isn't a proposition, and yet they almost always accept the definition of an agnostic as someone who isn't convinced that there is at least one God, but also isn't convinced that there is not at least one God, which is indeed a psychological state.
One of the,
Funny enough,
Sorry, do you want to go first, Philip?
No, go ahead. I've talked enough already.
Never. I love hearing you talk. Yeah. You could sort of look at atheism as a psychological state as well, in the same way that you look at agnosticism here and say, well, atheism is the psychological state of believing one side of the proposition and not the other side of the proposition, and theism is believing the opposite side of the proposition. And it's that psychological state. So they do this kind of argument against saying, well, these people, agnosticism is used in a psychological state. Well, that's because it's being used to define both sides of the proposition.
And another thing, right? Like, first of all, like he says oftentimes, metaphysical definition, and I don't have necessarily something against that, but at the same time, you could, as you said, you could construe it as an epistemic thing, where you actually believe that, that particular ontology is correct, that the particular ontological claim is true. And of course, you will also see very clearly that agnosticism cannot have sort of this metaphysical, let's say, component, because there is nothing to match that metaphysical component, because agnosticism is inherently just an epistemic thing.
It's just a state, yeah.
Ontologically, the God proposition is either true or false. There is no middle ground, So agnosticism is a middle ground that is created entirely on the epistemic spectrum, and there is no sort of correspective ontological thing to agnosticism. And so, I do honestly think that atheism, defined even in the philosophical sense, can be seen as an epistemic position, an epistemic position that has, that subscribes to a particular ontological claim, that has sort of that component of it. And when you say that atheism is true or false, you're talking about the propositional content, the content of that belief. Content of that belief instead of the belief itself. So that is why sort of agnosticism cannot, by its very nature, have this component, because there is nothing to reference in the ontology. It's just merely an observation about our sort of approach to this ontological question.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to beliefs, that's generally how we discuss them. We don't discuss them in terms of whether or not we hold particular psychological states. We discuss them in terms of the content and our attitude.
Yeah, whether or not they're true or false.
Yeah.
I mean, what I noted down there was the lack of belief position is not an epistemic answer to the proposition God exists. It's describing part of a psychological state, and theism, agnosticism, and atheism are epistemic answers to the proposition God exists. They fully answer whether they think it's true or whether they think it's false. So both theism and atheism are ontological positions, in that regard, because they're talking about whether it's true or false. And agnosticism is an epistemological position on the ontology, basically going, and I don't know whether it's true or false. I'm uncertain. And it's talking about both bits. I don't know whether it's true or false. It's not just going, well, I lack belief it's true. It's going, well, I lack belief it's true, I lack belief it's false. It's a full answer again, because when you're actually talking about a proposition, and I discussed this in the article, You Won't Believe This, you're supposed to be giving a read on whether you think it's true and whether you think it's false, because a proposition can be true or false. And that's why there's three epistemic answers towards a proposition. It's the belief that it's true, the belief that it's false, and I'm on the fence, I don't know either way, I'm uncertain, I'm suspending judgment, I lack belief that it's true and false. However you want to word it. And that's why saying I simply lack belief in God is not an epistemic answer. It is only a read of a psychological state, whereas agnosticism isn't only a read of a psychological state.
Yeah, that is one of the objections I have against this sort of lack of belief definition as well, because it's not a complete epistemic sort of picture that you have towards the proposition of God, right? It's just half of that. Like people that say, I just lack belief, I have nothing else to say about this, they don't understand this, right? It cannot just lack a belief in God and not have a position on whether or not the proposition is false, right? Because by law of excluded middle, essentially, you either believe it false or you don't believe it false. So you have a position on that other half of the component as well. You have to. Right, there's no escaping that. So to say that you just lack a belief on whether it's true, it's to not answer the thing fully, right? It would work as an umbrella term, but you would have to still have, like, whether or not you like to go into that and expose that part, you would still have to have an answer to that half. Otherwise, you just like you can't have you. It's not a full epistemic.
It's one of the
position.
reasons the 4-quadrant thing is so badly designed.
That
It really
as well.
is.
Yes. Yeah, and again, agnosticism would not have an ontological perspective, right? Because you're not saying, the proposition is not true and not false or something like that, right? It's neither, because that would sort of break the law of excluded middle. And you're also saying the proposition is not true and false, because that would be sort of a contradictory dialetheistic position, if you want. Right? Like what you're saying is simply, I'm not unable to figure it out, right? I'm unable, or I think that it's roughly equal because, this is good evidence and this is good evidence. But it doesn't have any ontology that ascribe to that, because it's still true that either theism is true or atheism is true. Right? Agnosticism can't be true in this sense because it doesn't have an ontology. So it's purely epistemic.
So hopefully that. I love how detailed we are on these things.
Sorry, I had to jump in. Yeah,
it's absolutely brilliant. I'm glad you did. Just catching up on the chat as well. As Greg says, he's so tired of this conversation. I just had to join your conversation. It's true though. It is one of those, when you're actually having the battle about it, it's one of those conversations that is frustrating, because I don't want to have a fight about it. I want to explain why I like my one, and I want to hear why you like your one, and then decide on which we'll use for the purpose of the conversation, and just go with that, and then actually get to the meat of the real conversation. Let's not get caught up in the fucking semantics, right? Obviously, my preference would be that you use the definition I prefer, but I'm sure your preference is that I use the definition that you prefer. I mean, that's just the way we're wired. Or equally, that we can convince the other one that actually, yes, this is the better definition. Fine, but there's a lot more interesting conversations to actually be had than which definition is the best and which one we're using. I like Icarus's comment though. If you're too weak to be a strong atheist, then don't be an atheist. Greg mentions that you should just call him agnostic so he doesn't have to deal with the fact that words have different usages. It's a good one, Greg. So Emerson makes a point about atheism as well, saying that some atheists think it's meaningless and others think God is internally incoherent. I must admit that I have actually seen different uses of atheism, though generally I take it to mean that their conclusion is the proposition is meaningless and therefore not worth considering. He also mentions that related to atheism on Twitter, apparently Aaron Ra said that he only lacks belief in God, and then went on to say there's not even a possibility that God exists. Which
I think he said that on the Thought Adventure podcast as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that happened. That was yeah. But also saying that it's not possible that God exists is not saying that it's impossible that God exists.
Yes, I remember him saying that bit. I remember his. Just because I say it's not a possibility doesn't mean it's impossible. What do you think impossible means,
I'm not
man?
saying God can't exist. I'm saying it's impossible for God to exist. What the fuck?
Yeah, it was a mess, honestly.
Yeah, but equally,
bad.
Aaron Ra has also said to me that he used to be of the lack of belief position and still supports that as the position of atheism, but he actually believes gods don't exist. So it seems like he changes depending on the conversation of what his position is and everything. It's a bit like, where's the consistency, man?
That's not atheism. That's anti-theism.
Please stop. Please. Like, we can't do all of it in one stream. Please, please, not the anti-theism thing, please.
OP, quick question from you. Is RR arguing for Lactheus? No, he's not. He's presenting what we've been saying for a very, very long time. There's multiple definitions and different reasons for why. That's basically it. We're just filling in a few gaps. So I don't know if you caught up with the first half of the video. We had a bit of a blip, and we've had to start the broadcast again. So this is part 2. Hopefully I'll get round to joining the video and just uploading a single version to Sci-Fi. Emerson, rocks can't have mental states. As a panpsychist, I find this deeply offensive. Actually, Emerson, I'm going to take this opportunity to invite you on to tell me a bit about panpsychism, please, because it's something that I only have a limited understanding of. And by limited, I mean from Googling and going, huh? So please come on and educate me. I would absolutely love your input on that one. And you never know, you could maybe convince me of panpsychism as well. So there you go. Anyway, I'm going to carry on with the video, and I will get to the rest of the comments later. I do apologise if I miss any of your comments. Please feel free to ask again. You know what I'm like. Use the moments when we take a break to ask any future questions, and I'll try and get to them.
When Thomas Huxley introduced the term agnostic, he didn't assign it to an epistemic psychological state, but today pretty much everyone uses it in this way. So what I'm getting at here is that when people try to dismiss Lactheism on account of it not being a metaphysical proposition, it's worth asking them how they define an agnostic.
I think we kind of answered that one, really, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
In addition to words having usages, they often have, within different communities and contexts, multiple usages. Perhaps the most relevant example of this, that I'm sure we're all aware of, is the word theory. I've genuinely lost count of how many times I've seen creationists dismiss evolution by natural selection on account of it being just a theory, which, of course, is an obvious equivocation. The word theory is used very differently in the scientific literature compared to the everyday informal use of the word. Or as the American Museum of Natural History expresses the distinction, in everyday use, the word theory often means an untested hunch or a guess without supporting evidence. But for scientists, a theory has nearly the opposite meaning. A theory is a well-substantiated explanation of an aspect of the natural world that can incorporate laws, hypotheses, and facts. Now, just as it's perfectly fine that there are 2 popular definitions of the word theory, I see no issue whatsoever with there being 2 popular definitions of the word atheism. Just as the word theory is used both in a scientific and colloquial everyday sense, the word atheism is used in a philosophical and colloquial psychological.
So, in that regard, if we were to address this, he is basically saying if you're having a philosophical conversation, you should use the most common philosophical definition. Is that right?
I'm not sure that's what he's saying.
Yeah, neither am I. But like, I get why you would think that from the way he's phrasing it. But I will say, like, one of the if he's gonna go that the everyday definition should be sort of lack of belief atheism because that's not a philosophical discussion, I would just have a hard time seeing any conversation on the issue of God not being philosophical.
Yeah, that was my comment going to be.
I have as well sometimes. Yeah, sorry, I didn't take that.
No, but that's just it. So it's like when you're talking about the theory of evolution, you're having a scientific conversation. You're not talking about the idea of evolution. You're talking about the scientific theory. Whereas if we talk about, I have a theory about why the bin men don't take my bins, that's me talking about, I've just got a general hunch sort of thing. Whereas when you're using atheism, I don't see you not having a philosophical conversation. Even if you're having a bad philosophical conversation, I don't see you not having a philosophical conversation. So unless it is literally purely descriptive as for someone who hasn't actually thought about it that much, and they're not getting involved in a conversation, and it's just a descriptive statement for any form of non-theist, I don't know how we would get to the same point with theory as we do in science.
Because like atheism is intrinsically, whether you believe that it is a lack of belief or you believe that that it is negation of, it is in both senses still connected to the sort of God issue.
Yeah.
While theory is not necessarily connected to evolution all the time. It could be used for many other things as well. So like, but if you're talking about God, and if you're talking in general, broadly speaking, whether or not it's okay to believe that, what are the reasons to believe in that, even what are the reasons to lack a belief, you're talking about epistemology in a sense. You're talking about logic, perhaps, if you're looking at arguments. You're having a philosophical conversation. So I don't like, to me, if you're conceding that it is better to use the philosophical definition when doing philosophy, you're conceding pretty much that you should be using that almost always, which is, I guess, a problem for people that. So I don't know. Like, again, I don't want to say that he's saying that because it's a bit ambiguous so far. If I don't know if that's what he's getting at.
Maybe he's not actually thinking that the dialogue is a philosophical dialogue. Maybe that's what he's saying. The everyday use where you're talking about gods, where we would think about this and we would say that we're having a philosophical dialogue even if we're not doing it well. It's a bit that, does God exist is a philosophical question, whereas what movie shall we watch tonight is not a philosophical question, right? So I think what he's there trying to do is actually talking about a difference between maybe academia and the layperson rather than philosophy and non-philosophy. Because
but that to me, like, say that there were sort of amateur people that were doing sort of evolution stuff, and then there were sort of academic people doing work on evolution. Would you? I don't know if it like if you go with the reasoning that if you're doing work on evolution, you should use theory that way, as the thing. I don't know if merely being an amateur sort of breaks you free from that sort of observation.
No, I'd agree with that as well.
So I don't know, like it's
a bit of a tough one. Maybe it's just a bit too ambiguous. Maybe rationality rules can clarify what he means by this, because we've already given a few thoughts, but I am aware that we don't fully understand what you mean by this. So
so like
I don't want to straw man what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Logical sense. Hence, so long as people clarify what they mean by their language, I really don't see a problem.
On that, I do think stipulative definitions is the way to go. And it's one of the things that I get annoyed with when I see people saying things like, especially those that are aware that atheism is polysemous, saying atheism makes no claims. Because you're like, well, it depends on the definition that you're using. And you're aware that there's multiple definitions. What you're saying is your definition of atheism makes no claims. But you're not stipulating to them that there are different definitions of atheism. So anyway, sorry, carry on.
Actually, on that note, I actually find this very, very useful because he says something like, as long as you define what you mean by atheism, you clarify that, there is no issue with that. And I generally agree with that, but that's a good sentiment to have pretty much for everything. So that's good. At the same time, you find it very often, and that's what I mean when I say that definition often carries with it some misconception, right? You say, what do you mean by atheism? And someone will say, oh, it just means that I lack a belief. And then you ask them, do you think that, it's more do you think that God exists is false? Something like that. Or do you think that it's more likely that God doesn't exist? And some people will answer to that, oh no, I just lack a belief that it is true, right? But then that sort of transcends the issue of how you explain your definition, because it's fine for you to say, oh, I mean by this that I lack a belief, but that doesn't absolve you from answering the question that I just asked, because that you have to have you just have to have an answer to that. It's a true dichotomy, right? Either you believe that or you don't believe that. Again, law of excluded middle here. So, merely your definition does nothing against that question. So as long as you're aware of that, I think what rationality rules is saying here is perfect. But in all other, I've encountered this sometimes, when you just say, oh, how do you define it? And then you sort of explain it and ask certain questions, but they'll retreat to the definition to defend something that is just a misconception on how this sort of epistemic scenery works. So, yeah.
Is when people force their preferred definition on others, be it theists who favour the metaphysical definition, mocking and grandstanding atheists who are just not convinced by any of the arguments for a god's existence, or atheists who prefer the psychological definition, insisting that self-described agnostics are atheists. Because, yes, they are.
So, I mean, I completely agree with this, and this is what we've said quite a lot of times. Yeah. I mean, I'm fully with you here. I wish people would stop prescribing their definitions onto others. It's fine to say, well, this is how I would use the term, but how would you define yourself? You can tell someone how you prefer to use the language, but not to say, no, you have to be this because that's how I use it. And I do find that the strongest voices come from those that prefer the lack of belief definition of atheism.
Absolutely.
But there are some theists that come into the online domain knowing full well that most online atheists prefer this lack of belief definition and forcing our preferred definition as the belief gods don't exist. And it's like, well, actually, you're equally being unfair because you should know by now that most of the internet atheists that you're debating with prefer this lack of belief definition. So forcing the belief gods don't exist definition onto them is equally wrong. And yeah, I mean, we should get them to stop that as well.
Yeah,
really.
I've also seen sometimes people that prefer the philosophical definition, argue in a way that sort of implies that people that prefer the lack of belief definition are somehow stupid or something like that. It's not a direct thing, but sometimes there is this sort of element in there where you're sort of arguing, oh, you're like a flat earther or something like that, and that implies some level of sort of, I guess, I don't know, at least understanding of topics.
Under education.
I don't necessarily, although I would agree maybe that a lot of people that prefer the lack definition didn't look into this much. I still think that is sort of a bad way to argue for this definition.
I agree with you.
It sort of puts someone into a spot where, you either agree with this definition or you consider it stupid. And that's not okay, you're not directly forcing someone, you're not saying you have to use the definition, but it's sort of like, is it a true choice if what you have to accept is to be considered stupid, right? That's not.
Yeah, it's sort of bullying.
Yeah, I must admit, though, with some people, I have come to that conclusion myself. And it's not necessarily been a direct, well, if you don't accept this definition, then you're nothing better than a flat earther. What I've said was it's generally been in response to someone who's fighting for only one definition. And I said, you realize your fight for only one definition is like when a creationist says there's only one definition of theory, which is an idea. And it's trying to make them realize that actually there are different definitions and they're just sitting there going, no, no, no. Yeah. So I think you're probably right. It's not helpful to get to that conclusion. I actually, believe it or not, try and stay out of this conversation on places like Twitter more often than not now because it never really goes anywhere. It just gets people arguing. But it was, I suppose you could call it a tactic that I used to try and make them realize that they're making the same mistake as someone that they don't have respect for, like a young Earth creationist, in defining one word with only one definition when there are multiple definitions. I don't think that people that necessarily use the lack of belief definition are stupid or anything like that.
No, me neither.
I just think some people can be stupid in their reasoning.
Yeah. I also want to say this, right? I genuinely believe that the vast majority of people that use the lack of belief definition, it just sort of were educated that way, either by the internet or something, and they looked at that thing and they said, yes, this is the most intuitive thing for me. This is how I understand it. and they don't have any sort of anything associated with that, any weird, maybe sort of dishonest tricks in conversations that even Rationality Rules criticizes, or stuff like that. So I think it's kind of unfair to do a blanket statement on all lack of belief atheists as sort of misinformed or stupid or stuff like that. I'm not like that's just not good, right? I'm categorically against that categorical assessment of all people that prefer the lack of belief definition. But I will say that I do find often in conversations online there's some behaviors that are associated with that. And even in this very video, as we saw before, when he defends the lack of belief definition, I think he makes certain observations there that, if true, and if that is the motivation behind the definition, should be, at least in my opinion, a bit concerning, because they're not really good, I guess, justifications for that definition. Also, like, just one last thing that he said here. He said, and also, people that prefer the philosophical definition should, or theists should not force atheists lack of belief atheists to affirm a proposition or something like that. I don't remember his exact wording, but I think it was something like that. And I mean, I agree, right? Like, because they just lack a belief in a way. But as I said a few minutes ago, it's still not a complete picture, right? You will have to say something about the whole thing at some point, right? Whether your definition covers it or not is an entirely separate question. Whether or not you actually have an epistemic position that requires some sort of justification. And by the way, even agnostics would need that. Even someone that is 50-50 would need to sort of have some sort of justification why it's reasonable to think that it is sort of 50-50. And they would presumably present, this is a good argument for theism, this is a good argument for atheism. I don't see one overpowering the other, so I think this is why agnosticism is reasonable, for example. Or I just don't understand much on the topic, right? I haven't looked into it, right? That's why I'm an agnostic or something like that. That could be another way. And, you still have to, like, just using that definition doesn't absolve you from questions and internal justification and even external justification in dialogue about that. That is what I'm trying to say. So I hope that that's not what he meant.
I mean, a couple of things I'll say here. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
When it comes to, like, my experience with one side or the other being more forceful and being more kind of prescriptivist, my experience is with the lack of belief. People who define it as a lack of belief, it's usually them that I get coming to me and saying, no, it's only this one definition. But I will admit that my data will be skewed because I take the position God does not exist. So it's those people that come at me, whereas it might be a different experience if I adopted the lack of belief, and I might have a different set of people coming at me. So my data might be a bit skewed.
Yes.
And when it comes to calling them stupid, I would never dream of doing that. But there are some that I'm kind of happy to argue are just dogmatic.
Oh, that for me is...
Not all of them, because there are people, like you said, they're just coming into it, and they're learning these things through, say, the internet or through YouTube videos, so they're generally just misinformed. But there are groups where they have been introduced to these definitions and these ideas and these different usages who just simply argue, no, that's wrong. It is just a lack of belief and can't really justify it, but still cling on to it. So I'm kind of happy to call some of them dogmatic.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to call some of them dogmatic as well. Absolutely.
A lot of the big lack of belief atheist YouTubers, I would say, are quite dogmatic, and their followers in regard to them seem to be as well. Just a couple of comments that made me giggle whilst we were doing. Dean, nice to have you on the stream. He says, I don't know why I'm still here watching this. It's interesting, but I need to sleep and I don't care enough about this subject, but I'm still here.
We're just fucking interesting.
Dean, in all the years I've known you, we've never had this conversation. What's your ontological or epistemic position around the proposition God exists? Greg says that we need more subscribers. We need more people learning about and discussing these topics. Well, I mean, Greg, do you have any suggestions on Open?
Well, that's why Rationality Rules discussing it is great, because he has the subscriber count to make a difference.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it definitely helps, and hopefully we can engage him on the topic, and maybe have a roundtable discussion about some things that he disagrees with what we've said, and or equally he goes, hopefully you've helped me think about this in a different way. Hopefully there have been a few things that we've said tonight that may have piqued his interest. I hope so. I hope he watches this, even though that we had the errors where the video got off halfway down. Kyle, you say, what happened to falsifiability? In what regard? A hypothesis has to be falsifiable, which is why in some respects you can't refer to it as the God hypothesis, because God's existence in general is not falsifiable, although you could say there are specific gods and specific God claims that are falsifiable in the sense that they are so logically incoherent. They're basically like a square circle, and therefore they can't exist as described, but the general God thing is probably unfalsifiable.
Yeah, it also depends. I would say there are sort of degrees of falsifiability, right? Like the strongest grade of falsifiability would be simply that the hypothesis has an observation that if you observe, it just proves the hypothesis to be false, right? That is a very strong sort of grade of falsifiability. But there are also weaker grades, I think, where you would have an observation that if observed, you would sort of weaken the probability that the hypothesis is true. And on those grounds, I think theism absolutely has things, because if you can expect things from the hypothesis that an omniscient, omnibenevolent God exists, right? And there generally tends to be things that you can justifiably expect, if that were to be the case, then you can, by not observing these things, have some sort of falsifiability in that observation. That observation would falsify the God hypothesis because it's not expected given the truth of the God hypothesis. And for example, like evil or hiddenness or many other things would be such. And of course, there are things that you would expect given theism, and those would count as positive evidence, abductive evidence for the truth of theism.
Kyle also has another question. So it's saying, you just come in, but anti-theism is a term and you don't know why it's not used here. Okay, so even Hitchens used anti-theism in the way that we would use the term. So anti means against or opposed to, rather than the negation of or opposite of. So you're against theism. So you're against the belief gods exist. You're against people believing in gods. That is what an anti-theist is, someone that is against theism. Whereas holding the belief gods do not exist, so in that regard, it's the negation of theism, because theism is the belief or propositional content of the belief that at least one God exists. So the negation of that would be the proposition gods do not exist, with the theist believing one and the atheist believing in another. Now, obviously, as we've discussed, atheism is polysemous, and this entire video and Dave's video that he did the other day, before Rationality Rules was released, on the Tale of Two Usages, and articles that we have done on Answers in Reason, like the etymology of atheism, describe a number of different usages. And in fact, there's also an article about Hitchens on anti-theism as well. It's only very recently that people have been trying to turn anti-theism into the belief gods don't exist, with people like Randolph Richardson trying to promote it on his Define Atheism, because he is trying to gatekeep the lack of belief definition as atheism and say that the other terms are something else. So he is the one redefining atheism and redefining anti-theism.
Anti-theism is mostly a political movement.
Yes.
You would essentially think that, the belief in God has some harm associated to it, that religion is harmful in a way that would classify you as an anti-theist, in my opinion. If you simply think that theism is false, then you are an atheist.
Yeah. I mean, if you're anti-abortion, you're against abortion. you want abortion to stop. You're in a movement that is out to cancel it.
Yeah,
And
you don't
that's
believe abortion doesn't
anti-theism for us.
exist.
Yeah, which is the point that Icarus made, which is brilliant.
Oh,
Yeah,
did he?
it's a great analogy.
Yeah, it's a very good analogy.
There you go. Yeah, I'll load it up on the same. Thinking anti-theism means gods don't exist is like thinking anti-vaxxers don't believe that vaccines exist. Yeah, well done. Very good job. I hadn't got to that point.
That was, yeah.
But yes, and Trainwrecked, you're very right that Randolph Richardson has a very interesting logic page on his website. We've actually...
I haven't read it.
Have you not? Oh, we've analysed it on... it must have been before we knew you, Phil.
Is it all about logic?
No, it's... I have no clue what logic is.
Yeah, he uses the term logic in a way that I don't quite understand.
He's basically using what he thinks of as logic symbols and using them to just basically go, see, this is the logic, and I've used symbols, so therefore I'm right, you know?
Yeah, he thinks if you basically use variables in certain logical shorthands, then that is the same as doing logic.
Okay, I'll have to take a look then.
Yeah.
Stream it sometime.
Yeah, no, I mean, even in the highlights, I think that we've got on. God the Scummer says, I get on with Randolph, but the way he personally defines anti-theism is nonsensical. I agree with you, actually. I don't think Randolph is actually a bad guy in any way, shape, or form.
No, me neither, by the way.
I've had quite a few good conversations with him, especially on YouTube. Like, we've had arguments on Twitter, but you get him out of the Twitter environment. He's actually a nice guy. I just think he's incredibly misguided with a number of things he says. For example, he on his site basically made the claim that there were Christians 500 years before Christ was even born, and then he must have watched our video where we addressed this and he corrected it but made it worse by misunderstanding what Christos meant and then saying that they were the Christians that existed 500 years beforehand, and you're just like, oh no.
Yeah, he said that the Hellenists were Christians and that those who followed Mithra were Christians long before Christians were called Christians.
Yeah. It's a shame. Like, he's obviously starting. I mean, a lot of people do this, and I think we all do it with certain things that we're really passionate about. He's starting with the conclusion, and he's filling in the gaps in between. And unfortunately, when you work that way, like we see with creationism, you end up with these faulty conclusions and you know, faulty logic in between, and that's what he's done with his entire Define Atheism. Philip, I think you'd actually quite enjoy that stream and some of the follow-ups that we've done to it.
I've seen the stream on him defining atheism and the whole Christian thing. The logic page I'm not aware of, so that's something that I have to check out.
Yeah, no, do check it out. Kyle has said, it seems nobody would self-describe as anti-theists. They would be atheists, but would be labelled by others as anti-theists. I don't see the purpose, but all right. Well, the purpose is, as Dave mentioned, it's more of a political stance. So someone who is anti-theist is basically saying that, you know, people shouldn't believe in gods. We shouldn't allow free worship. We shouldn't allow people to indoctrinate their kids, and that sort of thing. They're actually going out of their way to talk about the harms of religion rather than just being an atheist. I believe gods don't exist, right? And I actually think most theistic beliefs are innocuous. I do think certain religious practices and beliefs are harmful, right? But certain ones. I don't think that having a belief in gods or ascribing to a particular religion is necessarily harmful. And in fact, I think there are a lot of positives that you can get from religion that you lose when you become an atheist like us. So I don't think that religion is necessarily harmful. An anti-theist, someone like Christopher Hitchens, would go out right and say he thinks that there is so much harm done by religion all over the world that no one should believe in gods. That's the difference. So he is an atheist. He is also an anti-theist in that regard. And in fact, that's the quote by him, isn't it? I'm not even so much an atheist as I am an anti-theist. I not only hold that all religious beliefs of equal fiction, something like that, the same falsehood, but also that they are harmful and so on and so forth. That's roughly the quote. Honestly, go to answersandreason.com and type into our little search bar Hitchens on anti-theism, or just anti-theism, that one, or Hitchens. It'll come up, and the entire quote is there, and talking about how people use that particular one.
And as Frida is saying, he has a book, Hitchens, that religion poisons everything, and that is pretty much a very good summation of an anti-theist stance. The idea that religion is harmful. It's pretty much what I would subscribe to, anti-theism.
Most definitely.
I mean, if we're going to redefine anti-theism as the belief God does not exist, then what term do we use for what anti-theism is now? Anti-theism?
Anti-religion.
Yeah, that's basically the only way you can go. But then there's atheistic religions. Would you say atheistic religions are equally harmful?
Let's just not think too hard about
it. It's a mess. And with people constantly... I mean, this is one of the biggest issues that we have, and why we do talk about this, there can only be one definition, because it causes people to redefine things and redefine this. And you get to a point where they're using words and they're just bending them and making them nonsensical. And it's I do draw the adage of things like, well, yeah, I can define an atheist as anyone that picks their nose. And so at any point in our life, every single one of us has been an atheist at one point in our life, because we've all picked our nose at once, even if we weren't fully aware we were doing it as kids. So therefore, everyone's an atheist because we've all picked our noses. But that wouldn't be understood, right? There's no real benefit to me defining atheism that way. It's completely ridiculous. Now, that's an absurdism as well, and I get it's an absurdism, but that's basically what people do by keep changing these words, because they're so trying to gatekeep this lack of belief definition of atheism. They're having to change all these other definitions, and they're getting more and more ridiculous with what they're having to define them as. And that's why I was giving that absurd example.
I also don't understand why Randolph doesn't just simply use, strong atheism for the belief that no gods exist. Yeah, that seems like easier, like to keep anti-atheism as what it is meant by Hitchens and others, and to just say that people that believe no gods exist are strong atheists.
Because sorry.
So sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because by dividing it like that, it brings with it an actual admission that there is more than one kind of atheism.
Oh, I see. Oh, so he doesn't want to do that. And
there can only be one.
Yeah.
He is Highlander.
Now. Yes. Okay.
Highlander atheism. Is there? I tell you what. Is there the Highlander fallacy? Because I think this is what we should coin it. There can only be one. Anytime anyone says there can only be one definition, it is the Highlander fallacy.
The Highlander fallacy. Although we're old and we know that film, and most people probably don't.
Have they not done a reboot of it yet?
Not yet.
Yeah. So just to answer,
Kyle, is that you admitting that you've never seen it, Phil?
Yeah, that is me to shut up and don't talk about it. So as Kyle is saying in the chat, he's asking, so is there a label for the belief that no gods exist? And the answer
Atheist.
to that is, the way me, Dave, and Joe would say that label is atheism. That's how we like to define atheism. But there is, I guess people that prefer to define atheism as a lack of belief would say something like strong atheism.
And if you look at Flu's work, I mean, Flu in 1972 wanted to redefine atheism. So at that time, the belief no gods exist was the standard definition for atheism. And he wanted to bring in a separation, between positive and negative atheism is what he called it at the time. So positive atheism was the belief that no gods exist, and negative atheism was just, I don't believe in gods. Basically, it wasn't simply a lack of belief in gods. It was, I don't believe in gods. And that's what we were talking about earlier about the separation. And Flew actually had a method of investigation for the negative atheist. It was the way he would get someone to fully define a coherent God for them to try and discuss. And he found that no one could really ever define a coherent God, which is why he felt negative atheism was the strong position to be. It wasn't exactly the same as the agnostic position, although I suppose you could write it in logical terms around the same sort of thing, but there was a little bit more to it than just the logical notation.
I mean, just to throw in some more complication here as well, you've got William Rowe, who has the term positive atheism and negative atheism, and it's used in a very different way, where positive atheism is the idea that theists can be rational, they can have good reasons for believing, and negative atheism is the idea that theists have no good rational reasons. And positive atheism also includes sort of showing the benefits of atheism and things like that.
Isn't there friendly atheism as well, or
friendly atheism? Yeah.
That's how I knew.
That's basically William Rowe's positive atheism. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Kyle also asks, I mean, is that more or less not a position anybody really holds? No, all three of us hold the position. We believe gods do not exist. We're not saying that it's absolutely certain that no gods exist. It's not a knowledge claim. It's just saying what we believe about the proposition. And actually, there's a video where Dave and I justify why we believe gods don't exist. And in the highlights, we cut out, I think it was about a 20 to 25 minute highlight of the different arguments of how we justify gods do not exist and why we hold that position. So it's not a position that not really anybody holds. It's actually an incredibly common position with atheist philosophers. And you will actually find that when you talk to people, most people hold that position for at least certain gods. Maybe not every god, but certain gods. And what you got to understand there is you might be misunderstanding what the word belief means. A belief is simply something that you accept as true or think most likely. So if you were to say something like, oh, it's probably going to rain tomorrow, that could be written as you believe it is going to rain tomorrow. So if you were to say, well, it's probably most likely that gods don't exist, that is you saying you believe gods don't exist. It's so that there's this sort of problem around belief that people have, like it's a dirty word because, oh, well, belief is the thing theists do. No, it's the thing that humans do, and probably other creatures too, but we can say for the fact that all humans do it, unless they're brain dead, I guess, or have some serious cognitive impairment.
Should we watch the video to the end?
Yes, sorry, we'll get to that, but yeah, sorry, yeah, we'll get on it.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, you were moaning. We're taking too long, aren't we, Philip?
They are atheists according to this usage, but according to the metaphysical usage, they're not. And if they prefer the metaphysical usage, then so be it. And another problem, which I simply have to call out from my own camp, is when atheists say such things as there are no gods and religion is made up nonsense, which are metaphysical statements, but then, when pushed, retreat to the lack-theist position. No, if you're going to say that God doesn't exist, you've got to stick with the metaphysical definition. Or to put this all another way, I'll give the last word to Whoppy.
I don't really care, right, and I don't think other people should, about different uses of the word in different communities. It's just that once you start talking to people who use the word differently, you have to be clear about, I mean, either you, for the purposes of your conversation, you agree that you're going to use the word a certain way, or you're just very careful to translate backwards and forwards so that there's no confusion. Because what matters is not the word. What matters is the thoughts that are being expressed.
Because what matters is not the word. What matters is the thoughts that are being expressed.
Yep.
Alrighty, let's recap and wrap up. In the first chapter, we emphasised that words don't have intrinsic meanings, but rather usages, and consequently, anyone who insists that a word must be defined in a specific way either doesn't really understand how language works, or is probably trying to control a narrative. In the second chapter, we explored the epistemic psychological definition of atheism, and considered a few reasons as to why it's so heavily favoured by most self-described atheists. In short, just as we tend to say that we don't believe in such things as astrology and reincarnation without technically affirming the negative, the same is true for most atheists when it comes to theism. Now, you might have grievances with this definition, believing it deficient and limited, but this is simply the nature of informal language. Many colloquial words, such as theory, are deficient when scrutinized. In the third chapter, we explored atheism as defined as the metaphysical proposition that there are no gods, and considered a few reasons as to why this definition is favoured in the philosophical literature. In short, it's favoured because philosophers are not so much concerned about what people believe, but rather what's true, and one psychological state isn't a proposition. And then finally, in chapter 4, we reiterated that it's perfectly fine for the word atheism to have multiple valid definitions, just as it's perfectly fine to have multiple definitions of other words, such as theory. Okay, so we're done, or at least I am for now. If you think I've missed something, or just want to leave a comment to help the channel grow, then I look forward to reading your thoughts. As always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons, and you know what? Also to all of you that affirm the proposition of not being a patron. You're pretty cool too. I mean, you're not quite as cool as the patrons, no doubt, but, you know, you're alright.
Okay, so I think, yeah, like, as I said, and as we said, I think all of us would think that this is a great step in the positive, like, in a positive direction. Like, I think it just first, like, the main thing that I like about this video is that it finally puts to rest, you know, any prescriptivism about these definitions, and that it puts to rest, like, this idea that there's only one true definition of atheism. And, like, if that could be universally understood by everyone that engages in these conversations, that would be already a massive step forward. So
Most definitely.
I think this is absolutely great in that respect. But I think we've also sort of leveled some objections to certain things that we found a bit.
Definitely, I think we have. Right, so I would like us to just take a quick break, so I can refill and unload, and then we can get to any questions. So I do apologise if I have missed any questions or comments. I will be scrolling back through, but if anybody wants to repost their comment so that I can address it now, that would be most helpful. I'm just going to put us in Be Right Back really quickly, and then I'll switch us back to having 3 normal cameras rather than the little ones on the side. So catch you all in just a second. we're back in the room. Right. Sorry, folks, for that. I I needed to go. I actually think that, Rationality Rules did a really good job there at broaching the topic. I know that we interjected and contested a lot of things, but I felt that there were things that just needed to be explained further, like that he wasn't necessarily presenting the whole picture. But I think equally you can't always do that with everything you're doing. It's one of the things I've struggled with doing my shorts, where I'm trying to have these 5-minute videos and trying to get like even describing what a belief is into a video that's under 5 minutes long. It's really difficult. So the fact that his video was only 25 minutes long, I can understand why he didn't address everything. And I hope that us doing this longer stream has given people maybe a little bit more of an understanding. I'm going to scroll back through the comments now. Guys, did you have anything you wanted to address whilst I go scanning?
Yeah, I think we wanted to briefly talk about, what could be sort of reasons to prefer the lack of belief definition, just
We
because
did,
criticized the reasons that were presented so far.
So the number one
And,
was
like-
utility, wasn't it? I mean, that's the first one that we said, that there is utility to using the lack of belief definition, especially on the internet, because that is how the majority of atheists online will be using it. There is a contestant against that in the sense that most of the theists that you'll be having the conversations with will not necessarily be using it that way, though. But yeah, what others do you think of?
I think I think it has some intuitive value to it, right? Because like I get that if you find yourself in a situation where you figure out that everything that the reasons that you had for believing certain things, like God, are sort of like you become convinced that they are sort of flawed in ways, and then you lose that belief. It is quite natural to say, I just like that you find yourself in a position of lacking the belief that you had before, right? Like that seems like a very natural thing, because that's like accurately picturing what happened. You had belief in God for these reasons, and then you lost these reasons, and now you don't have one. So I think it carries some intuitive value, and I guess it's also kind of a safe haven in a way, maybe because you don't want to, like, after you figure out that all the reasons that you had, like, in your opinion, are flawed or something like that, you might find yourself in a position where you don't necessarily want to figure out where you stand. If you actually also don't believe that gods do not exist, or if you actually lean that way, what you're probably going to have some sort of position, but maybe you're not realizing it yet. You don't know. And so maybe like the only thing that you can know about yourself in that scenario would be that you sort of lost this belief, and that's how you describe yourself in a way. So I think in that sense it could be intuitive for people that just left a religion to describe themselves like that.
Especially if you don't know any better. If you go by the not theist definition, if you understand that the is it privative, it means not, and you go, well, if there's theist and there's atheist, well, not theist. I'm no longer a theist, so I'm not a theist. Therefore, so that you're right in that regard. That could be. It's intuitive in that regard. Okay, cool. So I've written down a second one. So we've got utility and intuitive.
Like, I don't know. I guess also because if you think that a theist is I guess there is some sort of intuitiveness. I don't know if this counts to do before with just the wording as well. Because you're a theist. Theist is someone who believes that there is a God, and there's sort of an atheist. It seems intuitive to say oh well, an atheist negates that proposition, but the proposition in this question would be, that this person believes in God, so you do not believe in God. That would be the negation of a proposition that contains the belief in a way. If you include the belief in the proposition, the negation of the proposition will be some sort of lack of belief, atheism. So I guess that could be another sort of way to intuitively argue for the definition. Again, as you said, utility, I think, but I don't know if I can see many others, many other reasons. Like I don't have a hard time coming up with them.
I mean, in line with what you're saying, there is the argument that I don't think it's a particularly good argument in the sense that they say that whether it's true or false is not important. It's whether you believe it true or false.
That's Eric Ross one, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you believe it or not? It's not even that you believe it or false. Do you believe it or do you not? So,
I mean, one thing is, a lot of people do see belief simply as a psychological state. They don't look at it in terms of the content of that belief. And they look at it in a sort of law of excluded middle. You either believe this thing or you don't believe this thing.
I mean, that is
theism.
That is true.
Yeah, theism is the belief. Atheism is not having that belief.
But
it depends on how you're looking at the way beliefs are as to whether that usage kind of makes sense.
No, but even if you hold to that belief, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say that's ignoring how propositions and logic and things like that actually
But like
work.
I say, a lot of people don't actually see it in that term.
Completely agree with you, which is why I've written down, belief is seen as purely psychological state. I've written that down as one of the good reasons. I mean, it's not. I suppose I wouldn't necessarily regard that as a good reason, but it's a justification at least, even if I don't regard it as a great one.
No, like the problem for me with that sort of view is that even if you view it that way, it turns out that the sort of belief that it is false definition is better in a way, because then you would have to apply the same logic that you just applied to the belief that it is false, and if you do that, then you get to three positions again, and the three positions, they just come up on their own, because if you have, believe it's true, believe it's false, that would be a contradiction. So you exclude that, believe it's true, not believe that it is false would be one, and not believe that it's true and believe that it's false would be the other one, and not believe that it's true and not believe that it is false would be the fourth one. The first one cannot be true because it's a contradiction. And so you remain with three positions on the meta. So it's even if you look at it that way, it turns out that this display just magically appears of these three things, and then it's just
it's
a matter
how you
of
ought to think about it, but it isn't. It's not necessarily how people do think about it.
Yeah, that's true. But I found very rarely that people object to this, because they do see that you can, if you explain this to them and if you show these permutations, then they see this. They just will call these things different with different names. And to that extent, I do think that a lack of belief definition can have a coherent schema, I guess. Right? I found many people that there is no logical necessarily problem with the lack of belief definition, I would say.
Depending.
No. I don't think there is, because when you use lack of belief, you're using it essentially as a synonym of non-theist, right? And to non-theists, there's no problem with non-theists, right? We all understand non-theists. There is no inherent problem with non-theists, and you're simply shifting your labels around, right? You're saying, atheist is the same as non-theist, and then for we don't have non-theists anymore, and we have to find different sort of ways to figure that out.
And you talk about types of atheist instead of types of non-theist.
Exactly, right? So you can have a coherent way to structure these things, I believe. But as we said, if you don't look at popularity, it's very weird. Why would you group, I guess, agnostics traditionally with atheist? Why not group agnostic with theist, for example? That is as an argument that can be leveled against it.
Especially when you get to the combination label of agnostic atheist and things like that. That's when you get into a real muddle. That's
Emerson actually did a video on this. It was excellent.
It's the quadrant one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I've still been meaning to get round based on your recommendation. It's in my to watch.
It's very good. I think it explains the issues with that very well. But I guess I will admit openly that a lot of my preference for the philosophical definition seems to come, like there are certain like just considerations looking at the structure of words and how the issues with that, like the issues that we mentioned, that you could have weak theists as well that would be at the same time weak atheists and stuff like that. That seems kind of odd for a definition if you just look at it without how they're being used and stuff like that. That is one of the reasons. But like most of my issues with that definition just stem from the misconceptions that often come with it, and the confusion, like the epistemic confusion that comes with that. The fact that it is needlessly opaque in a way. You'll have to ask further questions to fully understand what a person means. For example, in conversations around atheism, if someone says an atheist, you would have to inquire further to understand if they actually lack a belief both ways, or if they actually think that God doesn't exist is more likely. So why not just have a label that just explains that from a get-go? It seems easier, especially because conversations around this area just tend to happen like that. So that is another argument. And there are other arguments that just go, for example, the rhetorical tricks that even rationality rules criticize, about, God is like a fairy tale, but then I just lack a belief. That stuff seems to happen often, that I find problematic. And then again, there's just a whole host of things that seem to come with this definition that I find kind of not optimal. And some of these actually rationality rules showed that he thinks at least that they are the reasons why people use the lack of belief definition. And I think they're bad reasons. I think they genuinely sort of promote this idea that of almost irrationality to a certain extent on this issue. And that's why I dislike the definition. That being said, I fully recognize that there can be someone that holds to the lack of belief definition, that is aware of all of these issues, and that doesn't, hold to all of these issues, because it's not a direct entailment, right? It's not like if you hold to the lack of belief definition, then you automatically must hold to all of these misconceptions. But It's often accompanied by these misconceptions, but it's not like, and I understand why it's often accompanied by these misconceptions, because if you label it in a certain way, right, the structure of the wording itself seems to suggest a certain, way to look at epistemology, way to look at the belief in God, how to talk about it. It all seems to come packaged, or it at least seems to be encouraged by this definition. But if you don't have these issues, right, then, and if all the people that use the definition, the lack of belief definition, were clear on all of these issues, then I admit that most of the case for the philosophical definition, for me at least, would die. Most of the case would just die, and I would be much more at ease with people using this definition if I knew that all of these people actually understand all of this. And so if you still prefer the lack of belief definition and fully understand all of what we talked about, then I pretty much have almost nothing to say against you or against the usage of your definition, because again, most of what I criticize the lack of belief definition for stems from the conversations that often it sort of I guess promotes a certain type of conversation with
and the
theists, for
behaviors
example,
of the people,
and the behaviors and certain understandings on epistemology. For example, the idea that you can just lack a belief without addressing the other half of the other half of the problem, whether or not it is false. That is something that you see commonly. And again, like rationality rules, explained, there were certain things that were concerning there, in my opinion, about, are you actually reasonable when you actually tend to think that it is false, but do not want to justify because, you just can't be bothered in a way, right? That to me seems like you're endorsing some sort of rationality. So that seems also problematic to me. But should these issues disappear, then so be it, right? Then I would have much less of an objection to this type of usage.
That's fair enough. More than fair enough. So we didn't really get many justifications for actually using a belief definition, really. I mean, even then, when we talk about utility, we're basically making an ad populum, because it's not necessarily a fallacious ad populum, but it's an ad populum.
No, it's not. It's not a fallacious ad populum, I think.
Yeah, and we're talking about it's intuitive for certain people, especially around the way things are done, and belief. Some people see it purely described as psychological states, so they don't think about it in the way we would using propositional logic and just basic understanding of epistemology, because most people don't have that. And I mean, even up to a couple of years ago, I didn't have that understanding myself. So it's not a dig at people for being stupid. It's a lack of knowledge. And largely it is a lack of knowledge that seems to lead to this lack of belief definition being used. Which sounds like I'm telling people that they're stupid, and I don't think people are stupid just for a lack of knowledge. I definitely not. I think being able to absorb new information and filter it and actually not just go, no, it's different, and realize that, okay, I can really understand why people use the propositional state, and I can really understand why people use the lack of belief, and really process it and actually have a proper conversation and proper thoughts about it. And I do think that if people did have a basic understanding of epistemology and propositional logic, they would understand more of the at the very least the positive negative atheist stance, if not the atheism as the proposition gods do not exist. But they don't necessarily have to. They might read all of that and fully understand it and have good arguments for rejecting it as well. And if you do have good arguments for rejecting this, I'd be really, really interested to know about them. So carrying on with some of the comments, honestly, atheist, I mean, this was a while ago, but he said, sorry, I just got here. Are you guys genuinely in agreement or disagreement with RR's take? Generally, we're in agreement, because we've said for years that these terms are polysemous and people shouldn't try and enforce one or the other on each other. We were just trying to fill in a few gaps by doing a bit of a longer stream than his short video. Then we felt that there were some bits that were missed or overlooked, and maybe a couple of misconceptions. So hopefully we filled in those gaps quite well.
Yeah. I think the video was overall good. I think it is an improvement, but I think the section on his sort of reasons for the lack of belief definition, where I had quite a few things to say on that. I think that they were problematic as justifications for that definition.
Just going through the comments. Apparently people like our back soon message.
Or what?
When I put it into we'll be right back,
Yeah.
I've got the guy playing the bongos, and I've got Trump having a little dance and the cat bopping his head along. Just trying to get through all of those comments to find ones relevant to the stream, and it's just making me giggle.
Yeah, while you do that, just maybe one last thing that I wanted to say is perhaps discussing this idea of how you should approach this discussion, because it can seem, and I've seen this many times, that if you promote a definition, if you think that one definition is better, and even now as we went through sort of reasons for thinking that maybe the lack of belief definition is better, I think overall it tend to lean heavily in favor of the philosophical definition, at least from what we could tell, right? But that is also the reason why we prefer the definition, because I'm not going to hide, I absolutely think that the philosophical definition is better, but I don't think that this makes me a prescriptivist or sort of dogmatic about it or any of that, as some people tend to think when you just say, I prefer this definition, or I think this definition is better. I genuinely try to convince people to use this definition, because I do think that if more people use this definition, it would lead to clearer, more productive discussions with theists, more respectful discussion with theists, less of less misunderstandings when it comes to sort of epistemology and all of that. right? So I do think that this definition, like where it gained popularity, would improve conversations. So that's why I promote it, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm going to go and explicitly state that only this definition is correct, right? That you have to use this definition. I'm not even going to suggest that you have to use definition or you're some sort of stupid or any of that. Right?
Agreed.
I don't like that type of argument. So, and I absolutely welcome from the other side people who argue that the lack of belief definition is better, right? Like if you think that, then absolutely share your reasons. Like I'd love to hear them.
As long as
and
you
I think we
understand that there are multiple definitions. I think that's the thing.
exactly.
Don't come in with there's only one definition and it's the lack of belief definition and others are wrong, because that will change the conversation, won't it? I mean, most of my articles where I've been talking against the lack of belief definition have been against people claiming it's the only one. You know, most of my conversations which have gone poorly have been against the people saying this is the only definition.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this as well. Yeah, and even popular organizations like American Atheists, they have it on their website, plain and simple. This is the only definition, period. So yeah, it'd be forgiven to think that.
And to be honest, I think there are interesting discussions that can be had about how to use the term and why we should use the term and why we should look at it in particular ways and why we should look at discussion about God in particular ways. But like Philip said, having the actual discussion isn't the same as enforcing a definition.
Exactly. And if by the end of it you're gonna end up not being convinced by my arguments for the definition, right? If I'm not able to convince you, then fine. I'm not gonna be there, and continue harassing you that you should accept this definition or stuff like that. That you must accept it or something like that. Then I'm fine with you using the other definition. I just ask you to consider these ideas. Maybe you'll find value in them. Maybe they'll convince you. I hope so. I certainly hope so. But if they don't, then I'm gonna leave it there. That's fine as well.
Yeah.
So that I think should be the approach from both sides.
Absolutely. And another thing that I think is sort of important about having the discussion around how we define atheism is that there will be other topics covered that don't really get discussed in the atheist community and by people who hold to the lack of belief definition, like epistemology and how we look at beliefs and how we sort of look at the content of beliefs and things like that. And I think those are all important discussions when it comes to rationality and logic and reason and how we hold our stances and justify our beliefs. I think those are important discussions that need to be had within the atheist community.
Definitely. And I mean, one of the most embarrassing things I find within the atheist community is the rejection of this information as well. I mean, by no means do I have a massive understanding of epistemology. Pretty much all of my understanding has come from the last couple of years of conversations with you, Dave, and articles I've looked based off of conversations that we've had. And I've looked into things and I found some things very interesting. And it's made me realize, one, how much I don't know, but also how much others really don't know about the topic. And like the other day where I was just explaining some very, very basic epistemology to a fellow atheist, I was called a cult leader. That was the response. I'm now a cult leader because I'm explaining basic epistemology. Like, really?
Yeah.
That's even worse than just being called a theist. I actually have an entire cult of people following me because I can explain basic epistemology. What?
Well, that's another thing I think is important about Rationality Rules video. And I would say the same about Cosmic Skeptics video, but a lot of people seem to take that in a really wrong way, as if he was telling people that they had to adopt this usage when I didn't see that within his video. But they can actually influence all this kind of stuff going on in the atheist community and the discussions that are going on, what they accept. So I think them taking these kinds of steps is important and really helpful.
Definitely.
And if they could talk about epistemology and reason and rationality and justifying beliefs and epistemic responsibility, that too would be a very good thing.
Most definitely. So we've got some comments as well. Alistair says, in almost every context, I prefer the traditional definition because in one word, it captures a person's stance towards God's existence in a simple and clear way. Now, this is what I've said about clear and concise labels a number of times. You know, I'd like to talk about an agnostic, an apatheist, an agnostic, a theist, you know, and from there you can even break theist down further into polytheist and pantheist and all of that if you so wished. But I agree that I like clear and concise labels that allow me to accurately infer what someone does and does not believe without having to delve into it too much more deeply. Greg has a question, though. I'm going to let Philip answer this one. There's, how much of lacktheism do you think is simply due to intellectual laziness?
Oh my god. No, so I don't think there is much
Can I throw in my 2 cents here?
Yeah, go on, say
please
Philip.
do, because
I
No,
think
no.
that really depends on the individual, not the
Course it
actual
does.
definition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I'll say online, I think like my perception is skewed quite heavily, I guess, because I like from the interactions that I have online, I would perhaps see that being the case sometimes, you know. But I don't know. I genuinely do believe that looking broadly, you know, this is just people trying to do what makes most sense to them and
Yeah.
being honest and trying to figure stuff out. And this is why they subscribe to it. And like,
And they learn a
Yeah.
lot from within the community and from within
exactly.
content
And
creators and stuff. And we all have anchoring biases to things that we learn first and to information that comes from people we respect. So it's not intellectual laziness, it's more
Yeah.
sort of being misinformed.
yeah, that's what I wanted to say. This is great actually, because you know I don't think they recognize, you know, that I don't like I have this belief but I don't want to justify, so I'm just gonna use it, like just use lack of belief. I don't think that is sort of the driving force. I think some of them do that, but I don't think even they realize that they're doing that. I think most of the people who say, you know, God is like fairy tales and I just like a belief, they genuinely do not realize that these two things like have a bit of tension between them, right? Like I don't think most of them realize. So I wouldn't say that most of atheists, actually, I would say a very small percentage probably of atheists are motivated directly by the awareness that they should be justifying this proposition or this tendency to believe that it's more likely that God is false or that God doesn't exist. Sorry. But they don't want to do that, so they subscribe to lacktheism. I don't think they recognize this. I don't think they see this. So I like if that were the case, I would call them sort of lazy intellectually, but I don't think that I don't think that they recognize the issues for most of the time. So that's why that's I think what motivates this.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is going to sound bad, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but if you're not particularly skilled or learned in a topic, you won't understand how little you actually know about the topic. And if
This is
you
true.
if you have other people who are in the same boat but are passing on information and being treated as though they're experts on the topic, then that will lead to more and more misunderstandings, and nobody will actually know how little that they actually know about the topic that they're discussing. And I don't mean that in a rude way, because everybody's guilty of that in some way to some extent.
Yeah, I also think that, you know, on the note from earlier, I think that a lot of these could be classified as you know, intellectually lazy but unaware of that in a way, right? I think a lot of them basically behave in ways that would be considered intellectually lazy, but they're not motivated by the idea that they do not want to justify this, and that's the driving factor. They're just
Ignorantly
driven by-
lazy.
yeah, they don't recognize this, but they behave in a way that I could see as, you know, intellectually lazy in a way. like at least if we take, for example, the things that even, Rationality Rules said in the video at the beginning, in the way he tried to explain why the definition is good, right? Like I think, as I said, I think it somehow endorses irrationality, and I think that is the position that some of these people find themselves in without recognizing that that is the position they find themselves in.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. We've had a comment from Icarus saying most new atheists know nothing about philosophy and learn about atheism from people like Matt Dillahunty or similar on YouTube, and that's when they learn about it's only a lack of belief. And Greg actually has responded to this saying, I've had a conversation with Dillahunty on this subject about 6 or 7 years ago in person over a beer, and he isn't as lacktheist as you may think. I can believe that. I can believe that he himself has a stronger opinion. I mean, he splits things into his terminology for it is implicit and explicit atheism, isn't it? You're explicitly atheist if you say you believe gods don't exist, and you're implicitly atheist if you lack a belief in gods, which is why he defended Aaron Ra's comment on rocks being atheist, because they are implicitly atheist because they lack that belief.
Well, I've heard Matt Dillahunty say several times in clips that atheism is just a lack of belief in gods, but there are atheists that also go on to argue that there are no gods, but that's not atheism in and of itself.
Yeah, like even at the beginning of this video, he said something like, it just, like, I don't remember exactly the wording, but it was something like, atheists like I believe in God, but then there's a subset of that goes
believe gods don't exist. Like yeah. Which we'd agree with, at least in the way that works, not necessarily by labels, but
yeah, exactly, by labels.
But by entailment, we'd agree with the entailment that could happen. And actually, I was just thinking about the comment you made earlier about how much we don't know, and we experience this all the time. So in my previous role and the role before that, I was you fucking cat. I was an analyst, and a lot of our work came out of Excel. And what we wanted from people was, when we were looking for hires, was people with, advanced knowledge in Excel. But unfortunately, advanced knowledge in Excel is defined as being able to do VLOOKUPs and pivot tables. And generally, people who've done them 1 or 2 times think they have advanced knowledge. But actually, what we regarded as advanced knowledge was all the way over here. That was what we were looking for, and not having done these things 1 or 2 times, it was knowing how to do these things well and the rest of it. But people thought that advanced knowledge in Excel was the top level of it. So once they knew how to do a VLOOKUP and a pivot table, that was it. And occasionally we would have someone join our team who could do those basics that genuinely didn't want to learn more and do the rest of the work that we did in our team, because, well, no, this is the upper level I care about. This is all I want to do. I don't want to think about this more. So could we say that there are maybe some of the lack of belief type atheists that go, no, this is as much as I want to think about this. I don't want to know more epistemology. Maybe there are. From my experience in another field, I can see this behavior from humans where they don't want to know more. But would I say that instantly, that all lack of belief atheists are that way inclined? No, God, no. I don't like sweeping statements. I just like to be open to, yes, there could be some that are this way inclined, but I doubt, or at least strongly hope, that it's not most of them.
I mean, you could get into something here. First I'll say there's nothing wrong with not knowing a lot of stuff, or being uninformed, or being ill-informed.
Of course not.
Everybody is to some degree. The problem comes when, like you said, Joe, you refuse to actually accept that you might not know these things or you might be wrong about these things. So when somebody comes up who is actually sort of educated in a topic and says, no, you're looking at this the wrong way, rather, the problem comes when you dismiss them. But if you think about it in terms of identity, if you're calling yourself an expert and that's something that you consider yourself and you consider yourself really smart, really knowledgeable, and a critical thinker, when somebody comes up to you with opposing evidence or challenges that, their identity is being challenged. So they dismiss it. It's not, oh, maybe I am wrong. It's, I'm really smart. How dare you challenge how clever I am? So there could be psychological things that go on when those things are challenged because the identity is being challenged.
Much in the way that we were talking about earlier, when you challenge a theist on their belief, and you might point out that a particular belief seems to be a bit stupid, actually it comes back on them because they might see themselves as a rational and intelligent person, but pointing out that their belief is stupid makes them go, well, you think I'm stupid because I hold this belief. So, yeah. I mean, I think that was Intrigue Feline's point as well, wasn't it? Really, people just don't like being challenged on the way they describe themselves.
I mean, sorry, can I just jump in quickly here
before
you go?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
Just to bring it back around to another example, let's look at something like Aaron Ra, who, and a lot of other atheists will say this as well, but Aaron Ra, he constantly says, I like to be shown when I'm wrong because then I'm not thinking incorrectly, or I like to be shown when I'm wrong because then I've learned something new. But often it is the case when you think of Tim O'Neill, when he corrected him on some really bad historical takes, Aaron Ra said, no, I'm not wrong. And he stood by his guns. And there's a lot of times when he's been corrected on several things, like what faith means within the Christian community, he'll say, no, that's not it. You're wrong. So his sort of ego and the need to come across as really well informed to his audience, who sees him as some authority and, real heavyweight intellectual, he needs to protect that identity and that image. And I think that can play a big part in why people reject it, being challenged.
I think that is general a tendency of a lot of people, like not only
just in general,
in general. And of course, if you have a big following, that just sort of increases the weight to keep you in that locked protect my sort of identity mode, right? But it generally exists, at large, I would say. But also another thing I'll add, try, and I know this is hard, and I know that you might not recognize always that you are in this situation, but try to proportion the level of confidence in the way you argue with, how much you actually think you know about something. Because this is something that I find incredibly, this is actually something that I find a lot of the times on Twitter, where people will go with something that they have like very little knowledge about, and you can see that, in the way when you question them about certain things, and they'll have these sky high confidence takes on something, with like this massive, I'm willing to die on this hill, absolutely, and they'll call you everything when they have like this just so little to go off of, and just try not to do that. Try to be humble in the way you engage with people on this.
Epistemic humility is a big thing.
Epistemic humility, yes. It's definitely going to be. It's going to be probably better if you underestimate, how much you know. And I know that can also be an issue, that you underestimate how much imposter syndrome and all of that, right? But like in general, at least in conversations, not as a psychological thing, right? But in conversations, it's safe. If it's safer if you actually, like, unless you are really confident in what you're saying, then tend to side on the caution
I completely agree with you, but the only problem there is when you're suffering with imposter syndrome against someone who's suffering with Dunning-Kruger, you spend your time going, "Oh shit, I really don't know enough," and they're like, "Yeah, I know what I'm talking about." And actually, you might be the one that's right, but they've managed to convince. And you have to go away and you spend ages looking it up, and you look this and you look this up, and you go, "Well, no, I was right. I've just checked everything that I've ever been through, and I'm definitely right, and nothing that they have said has been right." But by which point, 3 days have passed, and
I mean, to some extent, like a lot of atheists, I know not all atheists call themselves skeptics, but there is a huge amount of atheists that call themselves skeptics and who get involved in the kind of dilemma that Philip was just describing, where they have these sky-high confidence for very little knowledge. And a part of us being a good skeptic is when somebody comes up and says, well, maybe you might be wrong about that. A part of being a skeptic is going, maybe I should check my knowledge. Maybe I should be skeptical of what I'm thinking. And
I know it's hard, right? But that like, maybe the best way to put it is try to be curious about, like if you switch that mental thing to curiosity rather than sort of like, oh, you're wrong and I'll prove it to you or something, that generally tends to produce better conversations and better takes in general.
Yes, generally.
Switch from debate mode to learn mode.
Yeah, exactly. And that's gonna,
or even just discuss mode,
Also, like, I've seen, honestly, atheists in the questions mention, if we think that atheism can be minimally, I guess, defined as a lack of belief in gods.
I mean, I'm not up there in the comments yet. I'm still at half an hour ago.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't want to jump.
If you want me to jump ahead to it, I can.
No. It's better to do it systematically. Sorry, we can address that when we get.
I will get there with the comments. I am just trying to get through them.
Let's do that. Let's do it that way. Yes.
So there's this one from Trainwrecked which says, wait until T-Jump becomes more popular and we'll have people around defining atheism. There's no good reason to believe in God. So Honestly Atheist says at this point, it seems to me that epistemic atheists have only ever been saying lack of belief is one valid usage of the word, whereas metaphysical atheists have been the ones committing the Highlander fallacy. Well, no, the Highlander fallacy is the ones that are saying there is only one. So it feels to me that we're landing in a more Lacktheist-friendly position than has been previously recognised by the metaphysical camp. Would you guys agree with this? What I would say with that is that I think we've always been in the metaphysical camp. I think our problem has been with the Lacktheist variety, who have always not actually acknowledged there is another definition. So we don't have a problem with people defining it that way. We have a preference and we can argue for why we prefer atheism described as the proposition God or gods do not exist. The issue is when people say, no, it's only this definition, it's only a lack of belief. And when you try and have the conversation with them about what they mean by that and what their other positions are, no, you're wrong, you're a theist troll. And this sort of gatekeeping about the only one definition, which is why it's the Highlander fallacy that is committed generally by the lack of belief atheists. I like that you used Highlander fallacy, though. I'm hoping that this actually catches on. I'm hoping by next month, right, we're going to see loads of people just shouting Highlander fallacy. They're going to be getting it wrong because, let's face it, everybody gets fallacies wrong. But they're going to be shouting it out. We've actually put something into the world that we can be remembered for.
I'll say one thing for Rationality rules. Him saying the Highlander fallacy would actually suit him because he's got the hair and the beard and...
Yeah, definitely. And you could be Ramirez, and you don't even know who Ramirez is, but you could be Ramirez. I'm talking to you, Philip. That was his name, wasn't it, Dave? It's been so long since I've watched it.
Yeah, but he was a Spanish-Scottish guy.
I just wanted to say
Italians, Spaniards, what's the difference?
Yeah, it's all the same. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to quickly say that like my experience, honestly, atheist, is exactly precisely the opposite of yours, like big time, in the sense that like in my article even I argued like one thing I like maybe I recognize maybe this is just my outlook because Twitter tailors his thing like that, because I see only people on this side. I don't know what could be an explanation to this, but I genuinely think that even the most aggressive people arguing for the philosophical definition generally tend, actually, I must say that I haven't found, I cannot remember a single instance of when the people that were arguing for the philosophical definition were saying, this is the only correct usage. This is like that you have to use this use it this way, right? I haven't seen this. I have seen people that are aggressive on it, and I dislike that type of sort of argumentation, I guess. And we touched on it in this video as well. When the people put you in a position where you either accept the philosophical definition or you are labeled stupid and stuff like that. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's good, and that shouldn't be a thing. But like for people that generally just say, this is the only correct one, or you have to use this definition, this is the only thing that atheism means, like that's, in my experience, overwhelmingly on the side of people that argue for the lack of belief definition. That's why I've been so excited to see Rationality Rules talk about it like this in this video, because I'm at least happy, and I see that you are happy on this as well, that at least we're going to eliminate people, or at least have less of the people who are saying that there's only one definition, because that is genuinely what, like, one of the things that annoyed us. And even Dave made an entire video on this where someone responded to him, you're like, I think you're wrong on this. There is just this one, atheism means only this one thing.
We changed the definition 40 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. It only means this one thing, and so that's genuinely been my experience, that people that argue that there's only one definition are, like, in my experience, predominantly on the lack of belief side. But this might be just my experience.
I mean, Greg says the same thing that backs you up. He says, I really only have a problem with lack of belief atheism when people try to force the definition onto others, when they get militant, as in when they're being prescriptive with that definition. You have to accept my lack of belief definition of atheism, basically.
I mean, like I said earlier as well, our experience with that will be situated in the definition that we use, because it's the other camp that will be coming to correct us. So if we use the lack of belief definition, we'll have experience with people who define it as God does not exist going, that's wrong. And if we use the God does not exist, we won't have those people coming and correcting us. We'll have the lack of belief atheists coming in correcting us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But I was a lack of belief atheist for a long while, and I genuinely don't remember having an experience of.
Okay, yeah, but
I've discussed this with many people that prefer the philosophical definition, and I've had probably some kind of heated conversations on this to some extent. But I don't remember someone saying, "Oh, this is the only true definition, and you have to use this, and you're wrong in using that," or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Icarus also talks along these lines. He goes, I'm okay with people who lack belief in God or similar definitions for atheist activism. He has more issues with people redefining agnosticism and anti-theism and using agnostic atheism. And I think, this is a similar and somewhat separate issue. We touched on both the redefinition of agnosticism to weak atheism and anti-theism to be that positive atheism stance, the belief gods don't exist, it's frustrating. There's words already in play, and actually, no, do you know what? We want this word to mean this, so we're going to redefine these other words and tell people that they're wrong with their other usages. That's really frustrating. And then the whole agnostic atheism thing, we've got videos and articles on that. It is... Again, once you have that basic understanding of epistemology, you realize how nonsensical agnostic atheism is. It's either nonsensical or superfluous, depending on which definitions of the words you're using. And I've done an article going, if you use this combination, then it's this, and if you use that combination, then it's that. And yeah, no, I'm with you there, Icarus. It's frustrating, but equally, if people are at least somewhat stipulative, does it really matter? No. The frustrating thing is people have to be stipulative because, these words are so polysemous and so many different concurrent usages are going on at the same time. Greg says, yeah, what about the political activism usage of lack-theist atheism? We haven't talked about that. I mean, we did broach it earlier. I'm not sure whether it was in part 1 or part 2 of this video, where there is a political agenda to increase numbers. I mean, when I spoke to Aaron Ra, as I mentioned, he said, they find it hard to count their numbers because there are so many people that are separated by different positions, and he just wants them all to be regarded as atheists rather than looking at them as a non-theist grouping, which I was just like, well, why can't you just regard them as non-theists? It's like, no, we're the American atheists, not the American non-theists. Okay, well, why can't the American atheists focus on American atheists and non-theists and just still call yourselves the American atheists? You don't have to be prescriptive with your usage and try and force people into a box they don't want to be in, because most non-theists will probably be in line with all of your secular ideals anyway, and in fact they will most likely be at least locally atheist, using the philosophical terminology, even if they're not globally atheist. So I don't know how much more that we can really say about it. I do think there is a political agenda. I don't think most people, individuals that is, have a political agenda. I think many of them have been influenced by the political agenda, with folks, as we mentioned many times this stream, like Aaron Ra and Matt Dillahunty, who do have the political agenda. And that's why they want people to have this non-theist equals atheist and lack-theist position, etc. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I don't think so, personally.
I was hoping you would have something so I could quickly go down to the next comment.
We're sorry. Honestly, Atheist says, it seems to me that there only can be one position is more a feature of the metaphysical camp than the epistemic one. I mean, my experience is very, very, very different from that. I have only ever been told it's only a lack of belief by lack of belief atheists. You look at the American atheist sites, they outright tell other people they're wrong. You speak to Aaron Ra, we've got an entire article in response to one of his articles, in response to Ra's What is Atheism, where he is going on about even listing multiple definitions and saying, see, it's only that one. He is saying that other definitions are wrong, whereas most people who are in that metaphysical camp will go, well, there are other definitions, but we think you ought to use, this definition because it's a bit more sound. I mean, that's a short version of it, but for example, I've done an article with the issues with the lack of belief definition of atheism. That's not me saying you can't use it, but that's me highlighting issues with it. The problem is people will take that article and take me saying, no, you can't use it, you have to use my definition. I'm not saying that, right? I'm not telling you your definition is wrong. I am telling you that I see issues with this definition, and this is what they are, and people will not have a response to what I say about this definition, the definitional problem. They will go, no, I don't see that as a problem. Okay, well, why don't you see it as a problem? Because it's not a problem. And you're just like, okay, I spent a lot of time in this. This is the problem. This is another problem. This is another problem. What are your answers to it? They're not problems.
Right, okay. That's not really answering the problems. It's like, well, no, you see, you're just false because it's just a lack of belief, and that's what it is. And that is what we're talking about. And the lack of belief atheist tends to go down those paths. And it's why I tend to get frustrated with the conversation. And because of their repetitious assertion that it is the only definition, and it's the only correct definition, or whatever variation that they're putting forward, I then do start to lose it, and I do become more of a dick. I mean, I'm a dick at the best of the times, but when people keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing that sort of thing, I do go, oh, do you know what? You're no different than talking to a creationist, because they just go, no, theory's just an idea, theory's just an idea. And you're just going, atheism's just a lack of belief in gods, atheism's just a lack of belief in gods. You're not actually engaging in a conversation with me. So this conversation is no different to having that conversation with a creationist. And that's the point. And I hate getting to that point, because I'd much rather have the conversation with someone and go, oh, okay, yeah, do you know what? I appreciate that there's a different definition. I prefer the lack of belief definition because of this. And I answer, the special pleading thing because of, this. And actually, I don't see a contradiction here because I see truth in this format. And they could have a long conversation with me about it and actually address the points that are raised. Sorry, go for it, Philip.
And on that note, I just wanted to add that I think a lot of people confuse when people say, oh, I think this is a better definition with, this is the only definition and you must use this definition, right? Like, these are different things. And that's what I'm trying to, that was what I was trying to get at the beginning. I'm not like, I do still maintain that this one definition is better. I have no issues like saying that, that doesn't mean that I think it's the only definition. And I don't necessarily think that this is, actually, I don't think that this means that you have to use this definition. I think I would appreciate if you did, if I could convince you, but if I can't convince you, then so be it, right? That's sort of my way of approaching this. And I think a lot of people confuse that with, oh, you have to use it and this is the only definition, right? So there's a distinction there, and a distinction worth pointing out.
Yeah, I mean, you consider, right? You might see this as a bit of a stretch of the metaphor, or maybe a false equivalence, but I could say that operating in base 10 math is better because of, and there's a number of reasons. For example, the utility, generally when people are talking about mathematical problems, they're talking in base 10. That's not me saying you can't use binary or hexadecimal or anything like that. Actually, there are certain contextual situations where they are actually better, but I'm talking about in general, this type of math is the one that we should be using. And actually, when we're having a conversation and we go 1 + 5 or 1 + 9, we should be generally thinking in base 10 math. So if we're talking about a definition, like Philip mentions, just because we say, well, this particular definition is better, here are the reasons why you ought to use it, we're not necessarily saying you have to use it. There is a big difference, between that sort of thing. We would prefer you to use it. We definitely would. We're not saying you have to use it. And that's what we're talking about with prescriptivism. So if you're being prescriptive with the maths I just mentioned, no, you're saying you have to use base 10 in every equation. That's all there is. There is only base 10 math. And that is not what the metaphysical camp do. They say these are our preferences. This is why we think you ought to use this definition. Yes, there are other definitions. What the lack of belief people tend to do is go, no, it's only this, it's only this, it's only this. No, look at the dictionary. And then what they'll do is they'll give you the Google dictionary where it says disbelief or lack of belief. And they'll go, no, disbelief means lack of belief. I was like, well, why does it say or then? They're clearly different positions. Otherwise, it wouldn't say disbelief or lack of belief. No, because if you look at disbelief, a synonym of disbelief is lack of belief. Okay, but a disbelief isn't exactly the same. It means it's nearly the same. And that's because it's being used that way. But actually, going back to the basic epistemology comment that I made earlier, disbelief is actually the belief the proposition is false, not just merely lacking a belief in it. And, that definition that you'll find in the Google Dictionary, disbelief or lack of belief, is essentially going positive atheism or weak atheism.
Yeah. Like, especially in philosophy, disbelief usually means that you think the proposition is false.
Yeah.
At least that's what I've encountered very, very often.
I mean, even drama. That's how it was. The idea was to suspend the audience disbelief. To make them believe that they were really there. And obviously, you wouldn't fully make them believe that you're there, but that's what the theatre tries to do. That's what movies try to do. Make you believe that you're fully in that situation, be fully involved in it. You believe this situation is true until you sort of snap out of it and go, actually, no, I'm not going to call the police. But for that moment, you're actually scared. You're fully engaged with it. So it's not just within philosophy that you do it. You could make an argument from aesthetics there and say, well, it's all philosophy, but so carrying on through, there are a lot of comments along those lines. As you guys mentioned, I mean, there is a lot that it could be. Echo chambers, because we hold one position, we tend to have people who argue against us from the other, and if you hold a different position, you might have people argue against you from another. It also could be, like we were talking about before, the crossed wires. So if someone is telling you that this is why they think the position is better, you might misinterpret that as them saying you have to use this position. So there you go. Honestly, Atheist says, case in point, we can observe Joe here being dragged into a position of recognizing that lack of belief usage does not actually entail a formal fallacy and has popular utility. I mean, it does have popular utility. And depending on how the lack of belief is used, it doesn't necessarily entail a formal fallacy, but there could be a fallacy based on how someone uses the term. There could be if you don't allow a theist to be defined by the same form of lack of belief in God's not existing, then there's the fallacy because it's special pleading. It's, you're not being balanced. But it doesn't necessarily entail that. Kimmo says atheist just sounds edgier than agnostic, so let's make them into the same thing so we can all seem cool.
That is a good argument.
In fact, let's expand the definition of atheism to the point where if you don't accept the pantheistic version of God, then you're an atheist. So pretty much everyone on the existence of this planet is an atheist, and we're all fucking cool.
Yeah, that's like, I want more people to be cool. Let's do that.
But Icarus responds, but actually, anti-theist is the most edgy. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's the entire motivation behind it. Randolph actually wants to be seen as really edgy and wants to hold the belief gods don't exist.
He's not. He wouldn't qualify as an anti-theist, so that doesn't track.
I actually think he would.
He would be calling us badass, but he would like.
I mean, we can't deny that fact. Kimmo says agnostic seems to describe the don't believe, don't disbelieve stance just fine. Atheist covers disbelief just fine. Yes, no, you're completely right there. I mean, like we were discussing earlier, there's the epistemological answers to the proposition God exists. Believing it true, believing it false, and not believing it is either true or false. Whereas just lacking belief or not belief that it's true, however you want to use the terms, it's not an epistemic answer. You're not fully answering the proposition. So that is a big part of the issue that we have with it. It's not giving us a full answer. It is purely a read on a psychological state. Trainwreck says, what does it even mean for a definition to be wrong? I mean, that's a good question. What I would suggest in that regard, for a definition to be actually wrong, it would have to be contextually wrong. So in the realm of science, comes back to this, if we defined evolution as just a change in kind, or theory as just an idea, then we would be contextually wrong. But those definitions are not necessarily invalid in the greater scheme of things. That's how people are defining things. Do you have anything you can add to that?
Yeah, I think sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, I would say simply that the definition is wrong if it doesn't accurately represent how the word is being used at large. So if a dictionary saying that the plant means what we would describe as a star or something like that, I would say that definition is wrong, because it's not it tends not to be used that way.
This is a blue plant.
Yeah, exactly. That, I could say that it is wrong because it's not true that the majority of people are using plant to describe a phone. But it still wouldn't be wrong in the sense of, you could still call that, if you wanted to, a plant, if you were willing to explain that, and that could even gain traction, right? And at some point, it could be a popular word for the phone, and then it could start to be, a thing. But I would say that that would be the standard that I would use.
Another way I'd say a definition could be wrong is if the referent doesn't actually apply to what is being described. So if you say that over there is a dog, and the word dog refers to arachnids, then the definition would be wrong, because referent in the definition isn't what's being described.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers your question. Honestly, Atheist says, oh God, does the ACA actually say that's the only definition on their website? I'm not sure about the ACA, the American Atheist. So the AA actually say, they go on to talk about it's only a lack of belief in gods. Other definitions are wrong. Then they have a section below this bit where they go, older definitions are basically influenced by... Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So they do say that the only correct definition is the lack of belief in God. So the American Atheists, I cannot say for definite if the ACA say that, but at the very beginning of the video, there was a quote from Matt Dillahunty saying, much the same, atheism is just a lack of belief in gods. He did say there are some atheists that will also affirm the proposition that gods don't exist, but all atheism is a lack of belief in gods. So
remember that,
I don't know if he said it exactly the same way I said it.
No, because I remember going when he's when I watching that video. Oh, that's actually not that bad, So I don't remember exactly why I went. I would have to rewatch that video again to what he said. I just want to make sure that we're not misrepresenting what he said in that video.
I mean, Aaron Ra also makes a similar kind of argument.
Yeah,
so does Randolph, but I don't think they're directly. I know Randolph isn't. He's Canadian atheist, but I don't think Aaron is directly connected to the ACA anymore. I think he's connected
he is
to the
American atheist still.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I'm going to put a link, Honestly Atheist, to the article where I respond to Aaron Ra and him saying rocks are atheist and other definitions
Honestly
are wrong.
Atheist is gone.
Has he? I've missed you. Oh well, that link's dropped in there. I couldn't do it earlier because I had too many other windows open. But there's in response to Raz, what is atheism for you in there? And I tell you what, whilst I'm there, I'm just going to link drop as well the etymology of atheism, and from the original atheists up to modern usage. There is no argument in that article for which one you should use. At least I don't think there is. But I do talk about how when it came over to English from the French, and how Flint and Flew both were saying, there does not believe sorts of definitions and all that sort of thing. So it's one of those things. Hopefully, those help someone. Catching up with the chat. I'm trying to keep up with it. Kimo says, I still maintain an atheist is someone who believes gods don't exist as the idea held by the majority of people. It's the online atheist echo chambers that hold to fuels cajoling. I'd say that they take it. I mean, we discussed this earlier. I have a distinction between does not believe and lack of belief. So I think they take Flu's paper and take it one step further to the lack of belief. I equally still maintain that in literature and anyone who you don't see online, that the belief or proposition gods do not exist tends to be the main definition. Again, that was another article that I did about is the lack of belief definition the most common one that we see, which I'll drop a link to in the chat in a second as well. But just moving on through some more of these. God, I've just lost everything. Where's it gone? There it is. Sorry. Trying to get through these messages really quickly. Icarus thinks that for most people it's more Dunning-Kruger than laziness until they get confronted to the philosophical views. Potentially, I think that we're very much all subjected to the Dunning-Kruger effect, and the less we know, the more we think we know. And that ties back into the Excel example I gave before, where people thought they had really advanced knowledge of Excel until they joined our team and went, what the fuck are you guys doing? And they're like, well, this is how we use Excel. So, yeah, you can be very confident in your ignorance, and the more ignorant you are, the more confident you are. And it flips back to the other side. The more you know, the less confident you are. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we suffer with on the internet as well, because the people who actually know a lot tend to be a bit more, oh shit, am I sure about this subject? I mean, someone like Dave, who's studied it for 8-9 years, how long it is, and as a distinction, he's got his masters with distinction, and he's sitting there going, oh well, maybe I am wrong. And you've got some randomer on Twitter who's just used a Google definition of something, and he's coming in, I know I'm right because blah, 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 blah. And Dave's like going, oh shit, no, I need to go and look it up. And
happens more often than you think.
Yeah. So it's not just Dunning-Kruger, it's a combination of Dunning-Kruger and imposter syndrome. Yeah. I am trying to get through some of these other comments. Are there any other big ones that you think we need to address as I skim through them? Because there are a load, but I'm still about 40 minutes behind. Thank you very much, everybody, for all your messages as well. I really appreciate all the interaction. I love it when a stream is this busy, but I do apologise. It's just I can't keep up with it all. Kimmo, I want to know more about your Aaron cracked me up once when he used the probably misattributed phrase, I'd rather have a question I can't answer than an answer I can't question. You just said that, and you just, oh man. You just left that one in the air. You didn't answer it. I'm going through there. Yeah. Oh my god. Apparently Icarus has just googled the Highlander fallacy and there's a page from 2005. So what I thought was invented tonight on this stream. Yeah, we're too late. Well, that's just not fair. King of the Hill fallacy? That's a good suggestion, Icarus, as is your Battle Royale fallacy. Sean, the thing with Highlander is if you take their head, you take their power. Hey, the EA Show, how you doing? You've joined as well. How you doing, Khalil? Nice to have you here. Or you've been told off by Streamlabs. Yeah, there's. I still need to do that. I don't really care about people spamming in caps because they don't do it all that often. Yeah. All right. I'm trying to get through the final definition. So Greg says, I had a conversation with Steve McRae once. He was militant enough about the philosophical definition. Has he softened on that at all? I haven't spoken to him in several years. I think a lot of Steve's aggression to the topic comes from people telling him he has to define as an atheist. And I think that is what has inspired him to be quite aggressive back about the definition. And I think when someone has a more open and honest conversation with him about it and go, well, I prefer this definition, he's a lot less aggressive about it. You know, it's but I do think that I mean, I've spoken to him about this a few times, that sometimes he is too forceful with the way he comes across, not just on this topic, but on a couple of others. There are these times when he just, you know, straight there. But equally, I understand why he does it as well.
Yeah, I will also say that I owe Steve McRae because you know, he has been a big reason why I finally understood, you know, why this sort of the problems with the lack of belief definition and led me down the path of figuring this out. So
yeah,
like, I
that's right.
think he's absolutely a great sort of player in this debate. Although I will say as well that, you know, I find the way he argues about it probably not the way I would argue about it, not the way I would maybe. Yeah, but I, as you said, Joe, I think I understand why someone would do that if he gets everyday messages about how he's an atheist and not an agnostic and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's. I've said it before. If it wasn't for a conversation where I butted heads with Steve McRae a few years ago, I wouldn't have started looking more into these sorts of topics myself. You know, so I have a lot to thank him for and a lot to thank Dave for. So it, you know, just because I think that sometimes he can be too over the top, and I think he could have approached the conversation with me in a different way, and it might have had a positive response faster. The fact of the matter is, it still got me thinking about it. You know, and I know some people, it just makes them really defensive and they don't think about it. But with me, you know, it did work. His method actually worked for me. And I got chatting to Dave, and I got, you know, rereading the SEP article he gave me over and over again. So there are benefits. Khalil says, you guys should just become Muslims and then it wouldn't be an issue.
My Is the Quran Perfect article sums all that up perfectly for me.
Actually, do you hold, Khalil, that the Quran is perfect? or are you a little bit more liberal with your interpretation on that? Because I know it's supposed to be considered perfect, but yeah, that could be a conversation for another time, because otherwise we'll be going on and on and on and on. Scanning down the number of comments and things like that, it's been absolutely brilliant. But I am going to just skim past the rest of them right now, unless anyone has tagged me specifically in a comment, because there's so many comments. I can't keep up with you. I'm sorry. And it has almost got to 1 a.m, and I've got work in the morning.
Yeah, I think we should wrap up slowly because
Yeah.
it's getting late. And yeah.
Cool. All right. So what we have discussed tonight is how, like we've been saying for years, there are a number of different definitions of atheism. We do have a preference. We notice more negative behaviors with people that have a different preference to us, but we are also aware to that being in-group, out-group bias. I tend not to notice people who hold the same position as me say that there is only one definition. They just have a preferred definition that they want others to use, whereas people who hold the lack of belief definition do tend to say, no, it's the only definition. But as you've seen through the comments tonight, there are some who have a different, take on it. So hopefully what we have discussed tonight as well has been well-rounded enough. We've addressed a number of very minor issues that we saw with Rationality Rules' video, which overall was fantastic, and it was really great to see someone who is big in the atheist, especially the lack of belief atheist community, present this in the way that he did. And the comment he made a couple of times about how he's now critical of the lack of belief definition, I really hope we see some videos from him in the future about his critique over it and his preference and how he justifies his position now, and hopefully how he looks a bit more into things like epistemic responsibility and epistemic justification and all of that, because that would be very, very interesting to see him change his mind on a few of those things as well. Do you guys have anything that you want to add before I close it off for the night?
Just a couple of book suggestions.
50 Voices of Disbelief, Why We Are Atheists.
It's got essays from people like Michael Shermer, Graham Oppie, and a whole bunch of others discussing how they see atheism, why they see atheism, why they became atheists. It's really good.
Awesome. Atheism, A Guide for the Perplexed by Kerry Walters.
That's a really good one, and discusses the definition and the history of the word atheism and certain arguments for and against atheism. And of course, a book by the man.
Yes. So Atheism and Agnosticism by Graham Oppie. That one's supposed to be a little bit next level to his to the one that was mentioned in the stream, wasn't it?
This one's a pretty easy.
That's the easy one, and the other one's the next level.
Yeah.
No, I think Atheism, the Basics, is
the next level.
No, it's a pretty easy introductory book as well. But this one kind of cuts to the chase. Discusses why he uses terms like innocent and why he defines atheism and stuff that way, and discusses theoretical virtues.
Yeah, and also hopefully you understood the distinction that was made earlier between don't believe and lack of belief, and however you see it, if you think it's trivial or whatever, we are interested in your feedback on that as well. So anything that we've mentioned in, unfortunately, the 2 streams due to everything being cut off, I do apologize for that, folks. please let us know any critique you have in the comments, and we'll do our best to come back to you. And if we need to address it in a future stream, we will. There will be a number of sci-fi shorts coming out over the coming months, addressing a lot of the topics that we discuss on these streams and on our site, trying to break things down into really small, simplistic videos about 5 minutes long. We're also on Thursday going to be discussing a video that I sent a link to you guys in the chat the other day. Do you remember which one it was?
I think so. Wasn't it William Lane Craig on Ben
and
Shapiro?
Ben Shapiro, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting video to critique.
I'm not sure I can put up with Ben Shapiro.
Thankfully, the video is only 10 minutes long, so...
okay,
He
yeah.
also mentions the emotional problem of evil, so yeah, that really...
Okay,
yeah. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, so that is what we're going to be discussing this Thursday. And we've got a few ideas for what we're going to be doing in future streams. One thing that I'm actually really interested in was an idea from Luke, that's Bearded Heretic. He wants to talk about the psychology of superheroes. Not the supervillains, because the supervillains are quite easy, but the psychology of the superheroes. We did Morality of Superheroes last Christmas, so that'll be a fun stream where we can sort of let our hair down a little bit more. But anyway, thank you everybody who has been enjoying tonight. And thank you, Alan, for saying that you're enjoying the sci-fi shorts. And everybody who has joined into the chat, I do apologise if there were any comments that I didn't get to. I do my best to answer as many of them as possible. But you guys have been so awesome tonight, and there's been so many comments coming in. I haven't been able to keep up with every single one of them. It's great seeing you guys talk amongst yourselves as well, and all of you engage so respectfully with each other. That's what we want people to do. Even if you have a difference of opinion, just have the conversation rather than being a dick about it. And everybody that is catching a rerun, and everybody that's listening to the podcast, thank you to you as well. We really, really hope that you've enjoyed tonight's stream and found something of value in it. And we will catch you soon. So you've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And Philip.
Have a good night, all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.